Have you noticed a shift lately? Like an unprecedented, calculated withdrawal of modern men from relationships, from marriage, and even from traditional societal roles? Today, we're diving into Chapter 8 of the book Perverting Our Reproductive Nature, which is titled Men Opting Out. In this explainer, we're going to unpack the central mystery of this chapter. Why exactly is a growing number of men just choosing to step away, and what does that actually mean for the future of our civilization?
And that brings us to a really core question. Why are men literally walking off the playing field? The author's main argument here is that this massive male retreat isn't born out of laziness or apathy, which is what our culture often suggests. Instead, it acts as a very calculated survival strategy. Men are looking at the current landscape of modern relationships and simply deciding, you know what, I'm not going to play a game that feels completely rigged against me.
Now, to really understand why this is happening, we have to see how it builds on the domino effect we've been exploring in previous chapters. The book argues that technology and culture have slowly, but surely, severed our original relational design. Think about it. Birth controls separated consequence from sex. Pornography separated intimacy from reality. Video games sedated the natural, biological drive to achieve. Feminism shifted gender dynamics from a complement to a fierce competition. And modern dating economics basically shrank the pool of what the market considers valuable men. All of these factors compound to create a landscape where men feel increasingly alienated and totally disconnected from their historical roles. Section 1. The Great Male Withdrawal. This section of the book examines a growing online movement known as MGTOW, men going their own way. The author observes that these men are choosing to opt out of relationships with women entirely, and the book points out that this isn't some sort of power play. It's because they believe the risks of modern relationships far outweigh the rewards. They aren't asking for power, they are literally just asking to be left alone. To get a sense of this, consider this quote from filmmaker Cassie J. She actually started her documentary The Red Pill as a feminist investigating men's rights groups, and her perspective completely shifted. She said, "I stopped seeing the world through the lens of women versus men and started seeing it as a tapestry of overlapping human struggles." Through accounts like hers, the author argues that many men feel like silent casualties of modern cultural and legal systems, rather than the powerful oppressors they're so often portrayed to be. Moving on to Section 2, Marriage as a Liability. The author transitions here into a pretty sharp critique of our modern legal architecture, focusing specifically on how laws have radically altered male risk assessment. While marriage historically used to be a protective covenant, the book argues that today it presents massive legal and financial exposure for men. 70%. According to American Sociological Association data presented in the book, nearly 70% of all divorces are initiated by women. And get this, among college-educated couples, that number actually shoots up to 90%. So, for men looking at these numbers, the author suggests that entering into a marriage feels way less like finding a safe harbor and a lot more like playing a high-stakes game of Russian roulette with their future. To really shed light on why that is, the book shares the perspective of James J. Sexton, a seasoned divorce attorney. He frankly notes, divorce isn't about right or wrong, it's about leverage and liability. And this perfectly explains why the author views modern marriage as a high-risk liability for men. In many cases, men lose the house, they lose custody of their children, and they walk away completely financially drained, regardless of whether they were even at fault in the marriage. So, how did this legal shift actually happen? Well, under traditional at-fault divorce, someone had to prove harm, misconduct, or accountability to break the marriage. But no-fault divorce fundamentally changed the rules of the game. It turned marriage into a contract that can be easily broken for no reason at all. The author's argument here is that by removing accountability, we turned a sacred covenant into a precarious, highly unbalanced contract that very often breaks at the man's expense. Section 3. Pathologizing Boyhood and Masculinity. Now, the legal system is just one piece of this giant puzzle. The book argues that broader societal messaging sends a deeply conflicting directive. Basically, society simultaneously demands that men step up, be leaders, and provide, while relentlessly mocking or even medicating their natural instincts. The author traces a clear timeline of male alienation, and it starts really early. First, boyhood is pathologized in schools, where naturally energetic boys are diagnosed with ADHD and medicated just for failing to sit still. Second, fathers are constantly mocked as bumbling fools in the media. Third, natural masculine traits like assertiveness and stoicism get relabeled as toxic. And the final result of all this? Men simply retreat into screens, video games, and isolation.
The book points out that if you're constantly told your very nature is a problem, withdrawal becomes a completely logical response.
Dr. Warren Farrell really hits the nail on the head regarding the cultural drip of this mockery. He states, "When we portray fathers as bumbling fools, we're educating a generation to believe that men are unnecessary, or worse, expendable." The author uses this to show how media satire isn't just harmless comedy. It slowly, methodically erodes paternal dignity and cultural respect for men's traditional roles as providers and protectors. Section 4. The Silent Suicide Epidemic. This brings us to a heavy, incredibly emotional climax in the chapter. Because when men feel completely unneeded, the consequences of cultural isolation aren't just social withdrawal, they literally become a matter of life and death. The stark reality is reflected right here in the CDC data. Nearly 80% of all suicides in the United States are men. That means 4 out of 5 people who take their own lives are male, making it the leading cause of death for men under 50 in several Western countries. The author argues that this is not just a crisis of mental health, it's a crisis of a culture that has left men feeling completely invisible, irrelevant, and hopeless. Dr. John Barry captures the absolute severity of this issue, stating, "We are now at a point where masculinity itself is considered toxic and it's killing men, not metaphorically, but literally." The author's view is that framing masculinity as a disease has created a literal survival crisis for young men. When the cost of showing up is being labeled toxic, checking out feels like the only viable option left.
Section 5. A Culture Without Builders. This final section zooms out to ask a really profound civilizational question. What happens to the architecture of society when its protectors, its providers, and its builders disappear? What actually happens to the future when an entire generation of men simply walks away?
The core takeaway of this chapter is simple but powerful. A culture without builders is empty. Men are not the enemy, they are essential. The author argues that mocking and marginalizing men doesn't liberate society, it leaves it entirely foundationless. And this advances the book's broader thesis that perverting our reproductive nature directly paves the way for civilizational collapse. If we want a future, the book argues, we absolutely must stop treating half the population as a problem and start rebuilding mutual respect. As we wrap up this explainer and move toward the later chapters of the book, I want to leave you with the provocative thought. What happens when we finally realize we need the very builders we pushed away? I highly encourage you to explore these ideas further and support the author at the interactive companion site, pervertingourreproductivenature.com. Thank you so much for joining me today.